Alrighty, well, I think we may as well kick off because we've got lots to cover today. So welcome everyone to our webinar on Viva Engage and Yammer. What's the difference? So there's been plenty of buzz around the launch of Viva Engage, and from what we've gathered, many of the customers we've spoken with, and perhaps this is why you're joining this session today, is most people are still wondering what's the difference compared with Yammer. So is Viva Engage just Yammer rebranded? That's what we're going to address today. We want this to be a really interactive session, more of a discussion than a webinar. So please feel free to either raise your hand, just if you go up to reactions at the top of the screen, you can raise your hand there. Or if you feel more comfortable, just type your question in the chat and Emily will keep an eye on that and can duck in and ask those questions. So let's get straight to it. But before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which this online session is hosted. I'm coming to you from Narragansett country in the New South Wales Snowy Mountains, and I'd like to say Nurinj, which I've recently learned from my daughter is welcome in Narragansett. So I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and future. And I extend my respect to Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are present on today's session. So we'll move on to the agenda now. We're just going to start the session with a really quick quiz, and this is just to find out about how much you already know about Viva Engage and Yammer. Then it's going to be over to the experts. So I'll just introduce you to our panel today. And on our panel, we have James Tyer, who's joining us from the Pacific Northwest, right by near Microsoft headquarters. And James is looking after Viva Engage and is the Yammer Customer Engagement Manager. And from Engage Squared, we've got Jack Handy, who's the Manager for Change and Transformation. From SWOOP Analytics in Perth, we've got Matt Dodds, who's SWOOP's Product Director. So hang on, we're covering Pacific Northwest. Jack, I think you're in Melbourne. Matt's in Perth. I'm in the New South Wales Snowy Mountains, and Emily O'Brien's just north of Sydney. And Emily is our Director of Customer Success for APAC. So Emily, I'm going to hand straight over to you, and this is to ask some questions about what everyone knows about Viva Engage and Yammer.
Of course, thanks Sharon, and thanks everyone for joining. So if you're familiar with the webinars that we typically run, we love a bit of a poll at the start to understand where you're up to with the topic that we're covering. So I'll give you all just a few minutes to access Menti. It's usually easiest to access through your mobile device. So if you just use the QR code, or you can head to menti.com and just plug in the code that's on the screen there. And in just a minute or two, I'll jump across into Menti. But if you're logging across now, the first question should already be up there on the screen for you. So I'll give everyone another few seconds to get across into Menti. And as Sharon mentioned, this is just to understand what your current knowledge levels are around Viva Engage. And I'm sure a lot of your input into these poll questions will help to guide today's conversation with our experts. So let me just jump across into Menti now. And great to see that we already have some answers coming through. First question we wanted to cover off today was, have you started using Storyline in Viva Engage? And I think the fact that we have a few people who aren't sure what a Storyline is just yet, a few that haven't used it just yet, but then we have some people who have taken the plunge and they're using this feature. I think it'll make for some great discussion today. So I'll just give you all a few more seconds to submit your answers, but a little bit more skewed onto the no and not really knowing what it is just yet. So, but that's totally fine.
Emily, could you just share the link to the Menti poll in the chat, please? Sorry, Blake, we should have thought of doing that earlier. So it's just menti.com.
Yes, if you need to access, just at the top of the screen there, menti.com, and then it'll ask you to plug in that code there. So for anyone joining now, menti.com, code at the top of the screen so you can jump in. But in just a moment, I'm going to navigate to the next question as well. So let's power through. Have you communicated to employees about the upcoming new features in Viva Engage? And I think this will be a topic that we'll cover off today in terms of what you will need to communicate to employees, if anything. So we have a lot of people who haven't communicated just yet, a lot of people who are planning to. We've got one superstar who already has. So I wonder if there's anyone else who'll add to that one. But the main consensus being that haven't quite communicated just yet. Maybe after today's session, you'll have a little bit more information to start having those conversations. So thank you for the input on that question as well. Our next question is, do you understand the value of using Storyline in Viva Engage? I know that there's been lots of great sessions about Viva Engage and the new features that have been running over the last few months. So some of you may very well be across the value, but perhaps you haven't quite had the opportunity to use the features just yet. And of course, we can see that's why a lot of you are here today. We were actually quite overwhelmed with the number of registrations we received for this session. So we know it's a very hot topic, and hopefully we'll be able to cover off some of those questions that you have today. Now, our last question is a little bit more open-ended, and we can also refer to any other questions that you have in the chat throughout today's session, of course. But what are you hoping to learn from today's session, just given that we have experts from 3 different organisations being able to provide some insights and perspectives on Viva Engage and some of the new features? I'm pretty confident you can submit as many answers on this as you like. So maybe just in a few words, what are you hoping to learn from today's session? Perhaps it's a question, perhaps it is something you've experienced in your organisation so far around Viva Engage. We've got some answers coming through now. Business-specific examples of Storyline use cases, and it might even be cool to hear if for those who have already started using Storyline, how are you using it so far, if you feel comfortable to jump into the conversation today. The best way to use Storyline. Does Yammer have a future? I know that, the sort of angle for today's session was Viva Engage versus Yammer, so we're wanting to cover that off, of course, to start with. What's the difference, of course? How Storylines is going to fill a need that Communities is not. Engage versus Yammer. I think there's some common threads there, and as we do get into this discussion for today, it will be sort of facilitated by Sharon throughout, but then we're more than happy to sort of bring in some of the questions throughout the chat. So just to reiterate, we want to sort of make this as conversational and as go into deep discussion as possible. So feel free to use the raised hand feature or the chat throughout the session, and we'd love to bring you into the conversation as well. So in saying that, thank you again for providing those insights in the poll questions. At this point, I'll hand back to Sharon to kick off the discussion for today with our panel of experts.
Thanks so much, Emily. And James, Jack and Matt, just looking at some of those answers that came through, I think that's probably the sorts of things that we will address. So keep popping those questions in the chat or raising your hand. So we'll get on to some of those. And Emily, maybe you can prompt us with more of those throughout. But James, let's start with the question everyone's here to know. What is Viva Engage, and is it any different to Yammer?
Yeah, I'm just going to make it really simple. Viva Engage is a way of bringing Yammer into Teams. The entire Microsoft Viva experience is bringing an employee experience into Teams. Teams is the platform you do your work. Viva and all the apps within the Viva suite are those employee experience apps. So if you want to have the power of Yammer to have conversations, Storyline, as we've seen lots of posts going by to today, Viva Engage, in Teams, Viva Engage is the way you do it. The same way that Viva Connections can bring your SharePoint intranet and more into Teams. And we have integrations with SharePoint, with Outlook, with Viva Topics even. It is just simply a way of bringing the powers of Yammer into Teams.
A really good summation. Someone's just got their mic on. I can hear another conversation going. Can
All
you,
good,
Emily,
Sharon. I
figure?
think
Oh, you've sorted that.
I've just been
Thank
able
you.
to mute.
Yeah, sorry if that was distracting for you, James. So James, just on that, really a great summation there of what it is. So what new features can we expect to see? Of course, we've all heard about storylines. I don't know whether many of us have used it. It was really interesting to see that message in the chat from Nicole. And Nicole's at the ATO, which is the Australian Tax Office, and that they're just going to let people start playing with it. James, maybe can you tell us what features we can expect to see and maybe explain the storyline a little bit?
Definitely. So we announced Viva Engage in July, and then it was launched for everyone in late August. And along with our initial announcements, we talked about Storyline. Now that went GA for all users last week or the week before. So if you have a Yammer licenses right now, you can install Viva Engage in Teams. You can install and pin it for your users, and you can start using Storyline. It's turned on by default. You have control over that, though, if you are a Yammer network admin. Storyline is essentially posting to your profile. It's almost going back to the original idea of social media when Twitter and Facebook took off. Before advertising algorithms meant we just saw things that were designed to make us angry. Internally, things are safer. We're working with a level of trust. And what we created Storyline for is a way for, if I take a step back, communities have to have a clear purpose in order to be successful. They have to have community managers, but a clear purpose to make them successful. And there's a lot of stuff that now that we work in hybrid environments, remote environments, you don't have the opportunity to kind of round out who you are, to share who you are with your colleagues, or for leaders to show that they are human and can engage with people. Now, you could go and create a community for lots of different subjects and people could post in them all. But for example, I use my Storyline to share things I find interesting with my colleagues inside Microsoft, whether it's articles, research, pictures of where I've been. So all my colleagues who are around the world can take a look at those and get a better idea of who I am as a person, because for many of them, we're never going to meet in person. And when we take a step back and we see our leaders using them, we get the same impression. So we have some very senior leaders at Microsoft and senior leaders in our early adopter customers as well, where they are really using Storyline to showcase a bit more about who they are as people, so that they have some pets, that they are interested in these books that they've read, interspersed with things around business and strategy. So it gives a place for people to share a bit about me, which tends to be what we do in things like LinkedIn and other social media, without detracting from the us of a community.
So I understand all that. I thought it was really interesting early on when you were comparing it with things like Facebook and LinkedIn, because I know from a lot of internal comms people, that's been half the battle about getting Yammer off the ground in the first place, right? It's been, well, this is a business tool, not a social tool. So in a way, how are you dealing with that then? Because from what you're saying, I understand what you're saying about the storylines. It allows like for leaders to be known better, but it is back to that whole issue of, is it a social tool? Is it a work tool?
It's both. I don't think if people are sharing on a work tool, it's about work as well. If we build trust with people when we know them better. We build trust with people when we experience them in different social situations, whether it's talking about pets through to talking about strategy. So I've always felt that Yammer and now Viva Engage is a strong way to build that trust and connection. And for leaders, we want them to keep that safe space for us in our organization. And this is how they can really show it. And then we have stories that will be public preview next month and GA'd in January. That it brings a whole other level of short form. If you're familiar with Instagram, Snapchat, short form 90-second videos, photos, photo montages with stickers, with captions and all those things. And I really, I dislike generational stereotypes, but I start to show my age when I start to use them, I think. But I do think that even though my mum is used to doing these things, the next generations coming into the workforce are used to communicating through things like stories as opposed to typing, for example. And they're going to expect, especially leaders, to be communicating in a way that they are comfortable and familiar with. And that is where things like stories come in as well.
I heard you say, James, in there that you said Viva Yammer, now Viva Engage. Is that was that a slip, or is it going to be changed? Is Yammer now going to be called Viva Engage?
There are no plans right now
Okay.
to have those. It makes sense to ask that question. I'm afraid I don't have a better answer for everyone right now.
Fair enough. Claire's asked.
Sorry, Sharon, just to quickly jump in, a question from the chat around stories on Viva Engage. Do they appear similar to what they would on Instagram? Do they only last for a short amount of time? How does that all work, James?
So they're not ephemeral. They're going to stick around. And we thought about this, but the reason that we want them to always be there is, one, internal comms work really hard to get leaders in front of the camera, whether it's with an agency, whether it's with you just holding your phone up in front of the camera, in front of a leader, or them doing it themselves. We think it would do a disservice to you and your jobs if then the videos disappeared, 2 hours later. We also want to encourage users to put effort into creating their videos. And we're going to be offering lots of advice come January as to ways you can do that, because showcasing what you're working on, how you're working, a bit about your, some small things you might want to share about your personal life. If you've put in that effort, it would be really remiss of us to then say, oh, now they're all gone. And so while they won't appear in our storylines and stories kind of feeds that bring them to the attention of people after a while, they will always sit on your profile.
There's a question there. Oh, sorry, Jack, you jump in, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up just on a discussion point that we had just before, just around that sort of social is bad, and the fear from a lot of organizations around social, and I think that's the shift that we need to have. Social is good. There's a net benefit to connecting with your colleagues and building relationships, because that's what teams are about. So there's a net benefit. If you know more about your colleagues, then you have stronger relationships, and therefore you can work more effectively. So I think that's the shift, and obviously what we've been through in the last couple of years has exacerbated the need to develop those relationships across geographies and across locations. And Yammer at its heart has always been about self-expression, and that's been championed on Yammer. And I think some of the features like stories, storylines, leadership corner as well offers that space to build your brand. And I think that's a really interesting space that we're going into, and picking up on what James said around your personal space. And that's sort of, I know just from I have to admit, I don't use stories much on my other consumer social apps, but when I do, you do build up this vicarious relationship with people. You're passively consuming sort of information that you store, and so I think that's a net benefit of those storylines. And touching on the leadership corner piece there, I think the opportunity for leaders to build their brand and for them to become more personable is a great step, and there's more to come in that space, I think.
Really?
I have a model. I was going to talk about it a little bit later, but it seems pertinent to talk about this now. And it's something, and I think one of the things that I've definitely seen over the 10, 12 years that I've been dealing with sort of enterprise social, and that's that idea of trust, and how you build that. And Jack, you touched on it, that idea about, you know, as you get to know your colleagues and as you get to know that, it helps build trust. And James, you mentioned that. And I have this little diagram, which I'm just going to get up onto the screen, which I think is actually a really useful way. And I came up with this in probably 2015, but I think it's one of these things that's still pertinent now, given how much it is. And that's one of the real plus points I think about Viva Engage, is that it's kind of reinvigorated that whole conversation that you can have with your leaders around why they should get involved with enterprise social. But let me just share my screen. And this concept, you know, social is bad, and the way this, I actually used this when I spoke to an executive team in the company I was looking after their Yammer network, and it was a way to really sort of think about when people see these posts on Viva Engage, Yammer, whatever social network it is, in work, you're kind of looking at two factors. You're looking at what are people's capability and what are their benevolence, which is kind of almost like their likability factor. And what this model looks at is if you understand someone's capability, you garner respect. And I'm sure most people on the call can probably even think of people at work where they've got grudging respect for someone, don't really like them, but know that they do a really good job. Sort of opposite end of the spectrum are those people that are always really good fun at organizational events, the people that you want to go and have a coffee with, but you really like them, share very similar values, but you really have no idea about, you know, do they do a good job? You know them kind of really in that sort of social space. And then when you get both, where you start to see someone who demonstrates both their capability and their benevolence, you really start to build up that trust. And likewise, if you don't see people, and this is why I was always arguing about leaders getting onto social network, if you don't see that at all, your natural position is to actually not trust them. So when we think about that, when we think about the opportunity that things like storylines give us, this is where I think it is that opportunity for leaders to really start thinking about how they build trust. So, you know, if that leader's only posting about work, is only active in those work-based communities, then yes, they're going to garner some respect, but people aren't necessarily going to build that trust. And likewise, if they're only ever posting on storylines, or they're only ever posting in social spaces, you know, people don't see that sort of capability side. So for me, the storyline and social communities really start to help build that potential for, you know, showing bits about yourself and about how you work, and really fit into that sort of trust space. Hopefully that was useful.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. And there's been quite a few questions in the chat about what kinds of contents would you encourage users to blog into storylines. I guess you've answered that. Matt or Jack, have you got anything to expand on that?
Well, I think going back to what James said, this is, you know, the messaging around Yammer has been, you know, for many years has been around communities and you know, and building communities and asking questions and providing value in those spaces. This is a new space for you to update your colleagues and to, you know, go back to that. It's that social capital brand building piece where in a large organization it can be, you know, it could be difficult to be visible or to connect, and it gives a nice way to, you know, to do that and facilitate that. So I think when you're thinking about posting pieces, projects based wins, personal updates, promotions, learnings, training courses, anything that you know, that is personal to you, that doesn't have a space in the communities. And I think that's the distinction. And I think that we'll develop these use cases as we move forward. And I think that they'll be slightly different for different organizations and different teams.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think very much if you've got communities and they're active, then that's there's a logic, you know, there's a logic there. I think the important thing when thinking about all of this is the communities give people a whole lot of context around what you're talking about, and it allows people to understand what the topic is about, and actually can make people feel more comfortable to respond. It's very much you're talking to the community. There are people who are active in that community. So I think it's really important that we don't dismiss communities in this conversation. They should be, I think, for most people, they should be the sort of default place where you think about posting. But if you have got those things and you have just got these general updates that don't really seem to fit in, and that is often the case, and we know historically a lot of that stuff sometimes end up on people's all company feed, it's a way to sort of sift that out and really tie it to that individual and create that individual profile. So yeah, I think Jack, you nailed it there. Those sort of achievements and things that people are proud of on a real personal level would be the things that I would suggest for storylines. And I think that's where leaders can definitely capitalize on that. People want to get to know their leaders more. So that's that real opportunity for them to demonstrate that.
I also think in a lot of conversations with customers, we have many customers say our all company feed is just full of everything. What do we do? And Storylines gives a really interesting alternative to that, where you can restrict the all company feed because it works just like any other community. And Storyline automatically gives people places to go and engage and post those pictures of lattes and dogs and kids and all those things that help make them, you connect with them on a human level. We're leaving the all company feed clear for those more official corp comms type announcements. And I just want to draw attention, we did a best practice session that's in the chat right now with Australia's very own now independent learning and development consultant, Helen Blunden, on inspiration for using storylines and stories, because she's played with these things externally for years. And it's a great session with loads of starting questions to get you started.
So many questions in the chat, so keep them going. I'm just going to go to this latest one from Andrew. How do you view people's storylines? Do you need to follow them? And I'm guessing, I think this is a good example, and some of the other questions are like this too, James, is people really are still very fresh, not really knowing what it's going to look like. So can we, maybe let's go right back to the beginning. How do you view a storyline? And yeah, do you need to follow people?
Definitely. So storyline, if you want to go see your storyline, if you have it turned on, you click on your name in Yammer and you get taken to your profile page. That is where your storyline exists. You're essentially posting to your own profile. Stories will head there as well. In order to get notified that someone has posted to their storyline, you do need to follow them. So we're going back to, as we talked about, kind of traditional social media of, wow, Matt and Sharon and Jack, they've put some really interesting things there, and Emily there, I'm going to follow them. And then when they post, I'm going to get more information. Jillian just asked, can you post on behalf of? They are going to be equivalents to post on behalf of, but it's going to be more managed on behalf of. As part of premium capabilities, that will be part of a Viva license in addition to your Microsoft 365 license. So the basic storyline and stories with Viva Engage, if you have a Yammer license right now, you have access to. But also we've made announcements of our whole new set of capabilities that are very much designed to help you as internal communicators build and manage those leadership presences and engagement and campaigns.
Claire, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know you had quite a few questions. Did you want to jump in and ask James or Matt or Jack any of those questions that you had?
I think that my main one was just really one of them was yes, that, but also I guess I was just grappling with the idea that we're moving from being a community focused thing to more like a LinkedIn thing, where when we joined LinkedIn, we just followed people and that's the way you do it. But everyone who uses Yammer thinks of it as a community thing. So it's going to be a bit of a mindset change, and I'm not quite sure how we would actually do that. At the moment, we're still struggling with getting leaders to engage, and we've had some really good wins in the last few months. I guess I'm kind of loath to now push the leaders. It's a timing thing, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a. I still think the communities are the prime reason you would do this. I think, look, and I don't, James, you feel free to to jump in if you want to contradict that. But I think, the storylines is an extra feature, and I think for me, and when I think about how do we, internal comms, what do they do? How does this change impact me? I think, look, the good thing with the whole Viva Engage conversation is it's providing, more ways to engage. Literally, probably why they called it Viva Engage. You've got it on Teams now, very clearly being promoted. And I also think that it really allows people to, and leaders particularly, they may be unsure around what to post or where to do it. So you've got that opportunity to say, hey, look, just put a few little things up on your storyline, but really still guide them towards those more impactful things, may well be on communities. So I don't think it replaces it. I think it's complementary to it. And it's almost the comparison to LinkedIn is interesting because I think you get a lot of value from following people on LinkedIn in that sort of storyline feed, but actually there are still some very active professional groups which, again, give you that context. So I think in a work situation, I think still having those communities in that context is really important. So I would personally lean towards keep pushing the communities, but have that storylines in your sort of back pocket if you've got a leader who's particularly struggling, and say, well, hey, look, this is a way where you can just dip your toe in the waters.
Yeah, and just, I suppose, just to quickly expand on that, I absolutely think that it is complementary, and taking it back, the core ethos of Yammer still remains as a social enterprise network. So those core principles of trust, as Matt alluded to before, being interested, being inquisitive, creating a safe space, and being respectful, and creating those communities where you can connect. That doesn't change. That messaging doesn't change. This new feature gives you the ability to convey, your personality and your self-expression. So it's complementary, I think, and I wouldn't be changing the messaging. I would be I'd be modifying it or proposing it as something that can help, especially leaders in this space.
And I really appreciate that the conversation hasn't been about features and capability, but around people so far. But it doesn't mean that Microsoft isn't building some capabilities that might be of interest, such as the ability to auto-follow individuals to Active Directory groups. So you can have a dynamic group, you can auto-follow your leaders to specific parts of their organization. And it means that when you make a post on their behalf, because most likely that is what's happening at first, they will get notified. And we already know from our internal experiences at Microsoft that the reach and the speed to engage both increase when you're doing that.
I'm going to ask James this message, or actually maybe Jack, Matt, whoever wants to answer it from Alex. Would limiting who sees the story to those who follow you, would that cut down on the audience that actually sees your post as opposed to posting in the all company group?
I mean, we've been using storylines and been playing around with them. And even if you don't, there is an algorithm, that's right, isn't it, James, behind this. So even if you don't follow someone, storylines will potentially pop up in people's feeds. They do suggest, here's someone that looks interesting you might want to follow. Here's their storyline. They've made a storyline post. So they're not completely isolated only to their followers. But it obviously the followers will definitely see them, so, or definitely get them in their feed. So, and that's very similar to the sort of way that the home feed's working anyway. Even if someone posted it in all company, unless you're sort of following or watching that community, you may not see it straight away. Is that fair to say, James?
Yeah, I would say that's right. Blake wrote, so it's not kind of shouting into a void if you have no followers. No, we're going to surface them, but also it takes a while to build a following. So if you're posting stuff no one's interested in, a bit like when, corporate vanity accounts post just statements without questions and things like that, you won't get that information, you won't get that feedback. So the same way you build a following in other social media, be interesting, be yourself, be authentic, show that you're listening, will hold true. And then we will give a helping hand with our storylines feed as well.
Well, I can't resist this question from Andrew. Thanks for asking, Andrew. How will SWOOP report Viva Analytics? Matt, over to you.
Well, we are picking up storyline posts, and we're just working through them because of some technical reasons. They don't always surface, but yeah, we're going to be reporting those, and we're going to be adding those as a conversation type. So any of the filtering that you do, if you use SWOOP, there's an opportunity where you can show all chats or public or private. We're going to add an extra box on that list so that you can just filter it to storyline posts. Obviously, because they're a thread, you can go and look at all of those threads. They appear in the thread reporting already. So we're kind of covering all of those off. There are some core analytics in Viva Engage, James. I don't know whether you want to touch on what's there, and then I can kind of come back to what other things we've got in SWOOP for those people that aren't SWOOP users.
Definitely. We have analytics, basic analytics that you're all probably used to in your Yammer network at the community level and the thread level with questions and answer statistics. But we are building a whole new level of analytic capabilities, specifically around leaders and campaigns and answers that are part of the new premium offering. So again, if you're interested to know more about that, I would talk to your Microsoft account team. And there's a video on leadership that I put in the chat a bit further up if you want to get a kind of sneak peek of it.
Cool. And then, yeah, for us at SWOOP, the important thing for us has always been around providing analytics for people who aren't analysts. So we really want to sort of allow people to do that. So, the things that we look at are that behavior, those use cases, the personas. If anyone's seen the SWOOP personas, we kind of have this idea of, based on your posting activity, what do you as an individual line up from a persona point of view? Do you engage lots of people, or are you just an observer who sits back and watches, or are you someone who responds a lot, doesn't post that many things but is really contributing to all those replies and answers? So we try and give it that, and it's very much, if anyone's familiar with sort of Myers-Briggs or DISC profiles from a sort of HR about, how do you work, what's your kind of work styles, this is the sort of equivalent that SWOOP provides on top of the sort of basic usage analytics that really allow you to sort of help tailor and focus on how you build relationships, what your network effect is. And we also investigate things like sentiment and how you can blend some of those analytics and insights together. And I will do a shameless plug. We have got our Yammer and Viva Engage benchmarking study coming out, which has a whole range of different insights and things. So again, if people are interested in that, look out for that coming out very soon.
Yep, in the next week. So I'll share the link, or Emily can share that in the chat. Jack, I've got a question for you following on from what we were talking about earlier. How do, I think most of the people on this call, how should they let their organisation know about the change to Viva Engage? Or I think it was Nicole earlier just saying, let people play with it. What advice do you have along those lines?
Look, I think for sure, as we were saying previously, it's complementary, and the maturity of every organisation will be different, and so you need to take that into account. I think that what these updates allow for is an opportunity to re-engage and reassess and realign your social enterprise network and see if things are working. And if things aren't working, then some new features aren't necessarily going to fix it. There's a saying, it's not the platform's fault. So reassess, re-engage, and bring it back to the basics. And I think that looping back round to those core principles is really important. Making sure that people know why, and that there's a purpose aligned to this new platform that you're launching. If people don't know why, then you'll get that apathy and that disengagement. So I think you need to take it back to basics and then build from the bottom up. And these tools and these features can be complementary to different audiences and help build brands like we've discussed. But you need to have the basics right. So I'd sort of caveat with that. But I think definitely taking, depending on the maturity of your network, taking audiences like leaders and reaching out to your champions or to your early adopters to get them to play around, to trial, is a great first step.
That was one of the questions, I think, in the chat. Avita, was it from you? I'm not sure, about how do we, with storylines and things, how does that affect your ambassadors or your collaboration champions within Yammer?
Yeah, look, I think it's a great tool in the toolkit. I was talking just recently with one of my colleagues earlier in the week. I think I forget his surname, but there's a sort of a famous Microsoft blogger that creates videos of updates across the M365 stack. I think his first name's Kevin. Quite engaging chap, and he started doing stories. And my colleague actually messaged me via Instagram of these stories, and it's really engaging, really digestible content, and really handy. So I think it was top tricks on Outlook, and I think that there's a huge opportunity there for champion networks and other internal services within your organizations to quickly communicate key things to your teams and audiences. So it's sort of opened up a whole world of thoughts and opportunities in my head just around that sort of championing piece and that building the brand and conveying that information quickly.
Yeah.
And Viva Engage and Yammer, it's just, one product within the M365 suite. So Matt and Jack, how does Viva Engage and Yammer fit in with the rest of M365?
Well, I think for me, look, part of that is, and we've already touched on it, it is that sense of community. And I think that's really important. All of these things that we're talking about and the changes don't remove the fact that, I've always explained sort of enterprise social as, it's your, if you think of it in the digital workplace, it's like your kitchens and corridors. You've got other tools in the M365 suite, Teams, and your apps, are very much your day-to-day work. They're like your desk or the meeting rooms if you think about an office. Whereas the sort of Viva Engage space is always that sort of kitchen and corridors and more public space. And it's just trying to reflect on, that's the opportunity, I think, and how it fits across that suite. And I used to work with Jack a while back. We've always had those conversations with Jack, which tool when, and I think it's almost it almost guides people sometimes the wrong way. It's not about the tool. It's about, what is that conversation? Is it a broad conversation with lots of people? Is it supporting a community? That leans towards Viva Engage and Yammer. If it's about work, then to me, it naturally you work closely with one or two people, and you drive that into teams. Jack, you'll probably have a whole range of other insights.
Yeah, look, I think sort of in a nutshell, Viva Engage is that social layer, across that M365 suite, that that's sort of the positioning. And with Viva as that employee experience platform, it's sort of the messaging now from Microsoft is that there's 4 key pillars of Viva products and of that employee experience: connection, insight, purpose, and growth. And within that connection pillar, we have Viva Engage, accompanied by Viva Connections, and coming soon, Viva Amplify. And I don't want to distract the conversations on this call or with that service, but it sounds and looks great. But Viva Engage, and I think some of the conversations that I've been having with clients across the board is there seems to be a confusion, or a question that keeps coming up is, what's the difference between Viva Engage and Viva Connections? And from that app sort of point of view, that they can sort of look quite similar, and just to sort of address that, Viva Connections is that branded app for employees to find what they need to get their jobs done. And so with Viva Connections, it pulls in information from a whole range of different services and tools, including Viva Engage. So things will surface on that Viva Connections app. It's that aggregation of key tasks, and it's great, and it's highly personalized. You can brand it. It's a great experience to be able to communicate quickly to specific audiences about the things that they need to do in their day. So but that's Viva Connections, and then Viva Engage is that social layer that really lays across the top, and is that place to connect and engage your colleagues and leaders more broadly. So yeah, I think it's important to address that, because I think I've had some questions about those.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to open it up to everybody on the call. Anyone want to jump in? Just raise your hands, or just start talking if you like, and ask James or Jack or Matt a question. And I'd also be interested to know, have we answered the topic? Do you know, do you now know what the difference is between Viva Engage and Yammer? Go ahead if anyone wants to ask.
Well, while people are coming up with a question, I think the key for me with this, what I find interesting with all of this, and I think the opportunity that we have as a collective group of people that are thinking about enterprise social, is that the pandemic's finally opened the door to lots of people's mindset shift. I spent years pre-pandemic, pushing uphill to try and get people to use Yammer, and I think what the pandemic's done is, it's not necessarily meant that everyone's going to embrace it, but at least it's opened that door a little bit, so we can hopefully step through and have those conversations with leaders. So I think it's a really good opportune moment, and I think the extra marketing and attention around it is a real good opportunity. But I can see Laura's got her hand up, so I shall shut up now.
I do, Matt. Thanks so much. That was really interesting. Thanks for sharing all that great information. It's more of a reflection rather than a question, and that kind of follows on from what you were saying, Matt. We've just, I think, because of the pandemic, we've just got our people to kind of embrace Yammer. We still have the questions around, what is Yammer? What do I do with it? All that sort of stuff. But we definitely have a much stronger adoption than we've had ever before. My question maybe is for James. Having Viva Engage, Viva Insights, Yammer, and there's another Viva, feels like it might add to the confusion. Is there any plans to consolidate the naming conventions so that it's all under one single platform?
It's all under one single brand, which is why the Viva Engage app looks like Viva Learning and Insights, and it has the same, font and design. I'm not sure, exactly what will be happening next, but I can say I would expect to see closer integrations between the various components. This is kind of Viva 1.0, maybe sort of 1.5 now, and there's a lot more to come. And so I understand that it feels like there's a lot of extra apps, but compared to doing the same things in the other apps that organizations might be using right now, everyone's being taken to a website and a different login. Even if you have single sign-on, you're still going to different places. Now with the Viva's, it's an employee experience suite, and that experience happens upon the platform of Teams. So those things are at least happening in one place. And then I would look to how the integrations between the Viva suite start to appear. For one, the Yammer team have been building answers in Viva, which is like a structured core Reddit Stack Overflow for knowledge within your organization that really fits nicely with Viva topics, for example. And as Jack said, Viva Engage really is a complementary solution to Connections and soon to be coming Amplify as well for internal communicators. So I would expect it to get simpler, but also it's not very simple right now if you have apps doing the equivalent thing that all require you to go outside of where you're doing most of your work.
Is that enough response for you, Laura? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It does. I think, sorry, I know that there's another question. I think one of the things that might be a challenge for internal communicators is knowing that there are different names for these platforms. But when I think about the solution that we sell to our people, we have to almost take the names out, not take the names out. We have to think about it holistically, because I think all the naming could be a detraction.
For sure. And just quickly, I know we've got Jacob's got his hand up, but just quickly for that, I think it comes back down to that which tool when piece again, and it's a conversation I have time and time again with clients, and it's a good one to have. But I think that for us and broadly within the market, it does feel like a bit of a bombardment at the moment with the Viva suite and the Viva tools. But actually, if you look at the tools and the breakdown of them, some of them work in the background. So topics is connecting information across your different apps, sort of in the background. Learnings is its distinct app. Viva Amplify that we said is going to be essentially a campaign tool for communicators. So because sort of we're in this space, I think that we feel a bit bombarded, and I can understand and sympathize. I think for end users, it's important not to be too tool specific, and hopefully when it starts to integrate and we get to that iteration 2 with the broader Viva suite, it will be a little more seamless. I think this morning I got a prompt from Viva Insights notifying me that I had some focus time coming, and do I want to modify that and set some boundaries on that. Hopefully it will just be in your flow of work, and I think really that's the goal for Microsoft and really for us as employee experience practitioners, is that it should just feel like it's in your flow. So hopefully that's sort of the end goal, and I think that sort of we're seeing, we're hopefully getting there, and we'll do as we continue this journey.
Jacob, over to you.
Hey everybody, just bring camera on. There we go. Jacob here from Viva. Good to meet you all. Great session. Love jumping on these all the time. It's always awesome to hear from the experts in the space and have a bit of a chat about what the capabilities are and stuff like that. So. My question centers around what the guidance is for organizations that don't maybe use Yammer yet. If they're on a different enterprise social, what is Viva Engage just a non-starter in that space, or how are we sort of thinking and planning towards that kind of edge case?
For sure. Assuming, Jacob, that you're using your enterprise Teams account, it already means that you most likely 99% have Yammer licenses, and that means you have access to Viva Engage with Storyline and Stories now. In terms of using a rival product, all I would say, now I've been at Microsoft a year, is that the way that we've been talking about how Viva Engage is one of the ways that the powers of Yammer appear in various places across the suite. And the way those integrations happen, they're native integrations, they're designed within the suite They don't take you off to somewhere else. I can engage with a Viva Engage notification in my activity feed in Teams. I can reply, I can watch an embedded video from a notification in Outlook, for example, and other tools don't do that. They take you off someplace else. They want you in their application to see what you're doing. The second piece is with all the security compliance, retention, e-discovery, communications compliance that you're again already paying for with your Microsoft licenses, you will have a new Yammer network would be in what we call native mode. That means that it's backed by SharePoint Online and Office 365 groups, so users are provisioned through Active Directory. All these things mean it's a much more secure and compliant environment as well. And when we're talking about building trust and building inclusion and belonging, you know, that just that basic layer of safety, starting with the technology, but it can also help people feel more comfortable to start sharing within a Yammer or Viva Engage network.
Yep, appreciate the guidance. It's really great. From my point of view, we're not using Yammer because we don't have an enterprise social. We have an enterprise social, it's just not Yammer, and I don't see a world where we would use more than one necessarily. So that's problematic. But yeah, I appreciate the thoughts and the I understand as well. Like, you don't have to sell it to me. I'm well on the Yammer train. I've come from orgs that have used it previously, and it's I find it to be a great tool. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think look, the other message I would, the core basics, and it goes back to that whole message about, you know, it's not the technology, it's that, you know, it's the people that use it. So, you know, I'm always encouraged if people have got a enterprise social, if it's not sort of a Yammer based one, you know, they've probably crossed a lot of the hurdles in terms of at least opening up those mindsets. And I'm sure Jack can probably think of some examples where we've moved people, where clients have moved from one to the other. But I think that the important thing is it's that engaging with leaders, engaging with people, building their skills and capability. And there's lots of things. I saw Alex had put in a comment around you know, selling and convincing social networking to senior leadership. And sometimes it's just, you know, getting one or two people to just start celebrating birthdays and people and some of those things, and that builds momentum and starts to give people an indication. And that whole kind of role modeling is where people like champions and all of those other things come in when you're rolling out any kind of enterprise social. So I think it's really important to start, and the message there, go back to those basics. Think about, you know, what do you want leaders to do? Who are your most naturally active and engaging leaders? They're probably already doing that. They're probably the ones that will quite happily go and stand up in front of a crowd at a meeting. So you can start to pick those people off. You can then, you know, start to identify, you know, who are those people that are influencers. You know, you can certainly do that with SWOOP. You know, we can pick up who are the most sort of frequent posters, who's got that reach, and then it's you know, talking to them, helping them sort of be that role model for the rest of the network. So I think, yeah, dealing with those points is important.
Matt, one really good example for that, and Emily, I might get you to pop the slides up. We, as Matt mentioned earlier, next week we'll be releasing SWOOP's 2022-23 Yammer and Viva Engage benchmarking report, and there's a case study I'd love for all of you to read. Alex, I think it'll you'll get a lot out of it. It was with Emma Harrington, who's the CEO of Motoring and Membership for the NRMA, and she was talking about how, so she's CEO, she was really nervous to get onto Yammer, but now it's just become a real part of her day-to-day. So back to what you were talking about, Jack, with just the flow of her day, and it's literally like she's waiting to pick her kids up from a music lesson. She'll jump onto Yammer for 10 minutes and just like things, or like tag in one of her other leaders, those sorts of things. And it didn't come naturally to her. She wasn't using social media in a personal life so much, but it's a really good example of how leaders can make such a big influence, but, you know, starting from not knowing really what to do at the very beginning. So Alex, I'd totally recommend you read that story as one of the case studies. And I've just, James, you answered Fiona's message in there as well. I know there's a few that have come through, and we haven't gotten to all of them because it's 12 o'clock now. But please just answer more, put more questions in the chat, and we can get back to you offline. And we'll just move to the next slide, Emily. Jack, can I just hand over to you?
Yeah, quick one from me. We're at time. Thanks so much for joining today. And here are some details of Engage Squared, and we'd love to chat with you about re-engaging your Yammer network. I appreciate there's lots of engages on that slide, but reach out. Would be happy to have a chat about how you can take your Yammer network to the next step.
And there's some questions in there, James, for you, people wanting to connect. And I think it was Gillian earlier asked if anyone would like to connect with her. So if you get a chance, have a look through the chat. It's great. It's a great forum for us to learn off each other and to make some connections as well. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Totally appreciate your time. And James, a huge thank you to you for coming for us. I know it's the end of the day in Vancouver, so very much appreciate you joining us in Australia.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Well, thanks very much, everybody, and have a great rest of the day. And please just put more questions